Chapter 1 continued, Part 2 continued. This one answering the question, what are the main themes that have emerged from the history of psychology? Once again, I don't own the copyrights, and the authors still have not changed. So, the purpose of a theme, whether in music or writing or psychology, is to unify seemingly disparate or conflicting parts into a whole. As you will learn in the next 10 chapters, the scope of psychology is both broad and focused. Though the common object of our thinking is behavior, we approach it from various points of view. For example, social psychologists try to understand behavior by looking at how groups function, and neuroscientists try to understand behavior by looking at how neurons function. You might wonder what in the world they have in common, and until you understand the themes, and then you will know. The themes serve as a common thread of familiarity woven through all the chapters, connecting and unifying the numerous and varied topics in psychology. There are 4 themes around which this introductory to psychology course was created. 1. Psychology is a science. Its goals are to describe, explain, predict, and change behavior. 2. Behavior is a function of personality, environment, and their interaction. This is written in your textbook as B equals F parentheses P plus E plus PE, end of the parentheses. Behavior is influenced by P, person, and E, environment, and the interaction of person and environment. 3. Psychology has evolved into a socio-historical context, and its scientific and clinical approaches reflect this. 4. Socio-cultural context influences individual behavior as well as how psychological concepts are understood and applied. Let's take a look at them in more detail. So, Theme 1, Goals of Psychology and Other Sciences. Psychology uses scientific methods to study behavior. Some areas of study are also interested in behavior, but they do not use scientific methods. But they are not interested in behavior. Other areas of studies use scientific methods, but they are not interested in behavior. Psychology is the intersection of science and behavior, and as such, its goals are to describe, explain, predict, and change or control behavior. So it's not just science. It also uses scientific methods as well as behavior. So, first thing is describe. So, to describe something scientifically, it must first be systematically observed. The term for this is empiricism, and it is the hallmark of science. In psychology, we describe behavior and mental processes, i.e., we convey their characteristics using words. Complete, reliable, and accurate descriptions allow us to address the what of behavior. What am I observing? What is he doing? What am I thinking? What does a neuron look like? What are those kids doing to that other kid? Next is explain. To explain behavior and mental processes, we build on observation and description to address the how and why of behavior. In other words, we are stating what we believe to be the mechanisms and or the causes. Why is this happening? Why is he doing that? How does the neuron work? Why are those kids doing that? Next, we predict. To predict behavior and mental processes, we are drawing upon our observations, descriptions, and explanations to state what we think will happen in the future. This is the essence of hypothesis testing and experiments, as well as projected outcomes based on previous knowledge. Our predictions are only as good as our science. Prediction addresses the what if of behavior. What is likely to happen if we don't change a thing? What is likely to happen if we intervene? Next is change. To change or control the behavior and mental processes, we must first have the knowledge and ability to predict behavioral outcomes, and then we must make a decision to apply our knowledge, whether under the more controlled conditions of the laboratory or less controlled conditions of the real world. Change consists of altering the course of behavior, even the course of history. As you can imagine, having the power to control or change behavior is an awesome responsibility that bridges the world of science with the world of ethics. So, theme number 2, B equals F parentheses P plus E plus PE, end of the parentheses. Having just read how psychologists do science, we're ready to examine their point of view on the determinations of determinants of behavior. In other words, where should we look for causes of behavior? Why and how do behavior occur? Did you just think about the goal of psychology that addresses this? If you connected this theme to the second goal to explain behavior, you're already on your way to thinking like a psychologist. Let's put the formula into words. Behavior is a function of things about the person plus the things about the environment plus person times environment. You might be asking how human behavior can be reduced to a formula. Isn't that too simplistic? Well, you make a good point. The behavior of human beings is mysteriously complex. We behave as individuals and also as members of groups or categories. Our behavior is most certainly determined by many factors, and our individual behavior is notoriously difficult to predict. By shining our flashlight on each part of the formula, we can artificially separate the determinants of behavior in order to describe them and explain how they work. Ultimately, we consider human behavior in its totality. Excuse me. Behavior. In this formula, it refers to the behavior of a person, but it could be any organism. Behavior is broadly defined as any action or an organism emits. And for human organisms, that includes the thoughts and feelings in addition to overtly observable actions. F is a function of. In other words, it's a result of or works by way of. Person. One place to look when searching for ways to explain behaviors inside the person, also known as person variables or P variables. When psychologists look at internal factors that can influence behavior, they may consider any or all of the following: personality traits, genes, thoughts, beliefs, neurotransmitters, temperament, health, emotions, abilities, and the unconscious mind, attitudes, and that was just to name a few. Environment. Another important place to look for determinants of behavior is the environment. If we were to draw a line around the person, environment would include everything outside that line. When psychologists look at the things about the environment that influence behavior, they may consider the following: family, work, and living conditions, parenting, social and religious institutions, economic status, teachers, events, access to resources, friends, and social support. The PE, or person times environment. Psychologists want to know how person variables and environment variables affect each other. The name of this process is interaction. Another way to say this is that the action of one variable depends on the degree or the amount of another variable. So your behavior at any given time will depend on the environment you are in and that environment's influence on certain person factors. The same is true for the reverse. Your behavior at any given time is influenced by certain person factors and the influence of those internal factors on the environments you select. For example, let's say you're a college student who's on probation because your GPA dropped below a 2.0. The behavior we want to understand is your ineffective study habits. One person variable that explains your ineffective study habit is that you don't manage your time well. One E variable that explains your ineffective study habits is that you spend a lot of time in environments that are socially active, such as parties, social media, and bar hopping. How might poor time management be influenced by having an active social life? An obvious connection is that social activities take time and energy away from studying, which negatively affects your grades. Another explanation is that poor time management, for example, not planning ahead, not organizing your time, makes you more likely to be pulled off task by distractions such as your cell phone or spontaneous social activities. Can you see how these two factors conspire to keep your time management skills from developing? Can you also see how intervening at either the P variable or the E variable, or better yet, both, can lead to a positive academic outcome? Until this point, we've made an arbitrary distinction between inside and outside of a person, no less. As if there is a real line that indicates whether the inside ends and the outside begins. Like so many things in nature and the physical world, insides and outsides are connected. Sometimes the connecting place is readily apparent, like a door or a window. Other times it's less obvious, like semi-permeable membrane of a cell. The interaction of person and environment is a dynamic place where there is a great potential to explain and change behavior. In fact, our understanding of behavior would be incomplete without knowledge of the dynamic relationship between person and environment. Environmental conditions do not affect all people in the same ways. It depends on what each person brings to that equation. Further, people tend to seek out environments where their needs and desires can be expressed and fulfilled. This self-selecting tendency only serves to strengthen existing characteristics. Imagine the implications. Interactions of person and environment are so complex and can take so many different forms. Is it any wonder that it is so difficult to predict human behavior? Theme 3. Socio-historical context. History is context for everything that develops over time. Psychology as a discipline has grown and changed over time in much the same way that an individual person develops across his or her lifespan. From its birth in a laboratory in 1879, psychology has both shaped history and been shaped by it. Even its birth was a result of the timely confluence of physiology and philosophy. Since that time, psychologists have influenced such diverse practices as the parenting of young children and the NFL owners' selection of football players. Conversely, historical events have influenced both the research activities and therapeutic interventions of psychologists. For example, post-war periods have called upon the skills of psychologists to solve problems and addressing pressing needs, such as identifying and selecting soldiers for specific tasks, or diagnosing and treating psychological effects of witnessing trauma. These activities have, in turn, resulted in the growth of certain specialty areas of research and practice, such as psychology in the workplace, known as industrial organizational psychology, and the treatment of stress-related disorders, or health psychology. Much like the interaction of person and environment, psychology has interacted with society across time, and both have been affected. Socio-cultural context. How does socio-cultural context differ from socio-historical context, and why does it matter to psychology? Think once again about the interaction of person and environment. Cultural influences are both pervasive and specific. They include beliefs, values, norms, and practices that are shared by an entire society or any smaller social group within the society. You and I and everyone else grew up in a culture, actually more than one culture. While cultural context can include ethnical background, religious affiliation, and family practices, it can also be more covert or hidden, as in the unspoken attitudes or beliefs that we all hold. As a beginning psychology student, where would you place culture? More with the person or more with the environment? If you're having difficulty deciding, then you are right where you should be. Culture is a bridge between person and environment and is therefore a critical determinant of behavior, including the behavior of the discipline. What psychologists study, how we study it, and how we interpret the findings are all influenced by culture, our own and the culture of those we study. We must always keep cultural influences in mind. And that is the end of Chapter 1, Part 2, Question 2.